I'm Ray Hananina. It is Friday, October 8th, 2021 at 8:30, actually 8:27 Eastern time. And I'm broadcasting from Chicago where it's 7:30. And we're on the U.S. Arab Radio Network, broadcasting on WNZK AM 690 radio. This is a special segment this morning of Radio Baladi, and I'm proud to host it as a U.S. correspondent for the Arab News. This morning, in our second segment, we have a great guest, Dr. Nahad Ghazzoul, a Syrian academic who worked at Aleppo University to the end of 2011. Then she left for Jordan. Currently, she works at Paris Nanterre University. She's a Syrian activist who supported the Syrian refugees in Jordan on the relief, medical, and educational level. She also advocates for the rights of besieged Syrians in getting means of life, medical treatment, and having humanitarian corridors. She's a member of the Civil Society Room of the United Nations Envoys to Syria, Mr. Peterson, since 2016, and the General Secretariat of the National Syrian Assembly. Welcome, Dr. Ghazzoul. Thank you so much for joining this morning.
Thank you very much for this introduction. It's always a pleasure to be with you, Ray. Thank you.
You know, there's so many things going on with Syria. I mean, I know this week the Biden administration extended the Emergency Act that allows the U.S. to be involved. He has to do that at the end of each year, and he has extended it for a year. So Syria is on the U.S. radar screen, but I'm not sure how bright that presence is in the mind of Biden. He's so busy with so many things. There are other things I want to ask you about, but can you give us a sense of, is the U.S. really paying attention to Syria, or is it an afterthought at this point?
Thank you. This is really a very genuine question. Personally, I believe, and all the opponent activists believe that, America or the US is a main stakeholder in the Syrian file. However, this file has been allocated to the Russian administration, maybe by a gesture from Biden, although we can't see that, any reveal or declaration that states so. However, I mean, all the actions on ground indicates that after the, let me say it, the appalling withdrawal from Afghanistan, everybody was afraid that this can happen again in Syria, especially in the eastern part, leaving the area under the control of the PKK or YKK, and then you will have the Turkish concerns, and you will have maybe a new invasion from Turkey to that part of the world, and also the outbreak of ISIS in that area. However, the extension that happened, I don't know whether it is done for fund purposes, or it is a strategic, regular thing that usually takes place at that time, or it is part of, the amendment of the American policy towards Syria. I don't know. Maybe the new coming days would tell us more about this.
Yeah, there's so many things going on in Syria. As you pointed out, we have the Turks, who really are concerned about the Kurds. Everything they're doing, attacking the Kurds, they're worried about the Kurds building up a base using the turmoil in Syria to give them a quasi country. Then you have ISIS and Daesh that are still operating in different areas of the Middle East, including in some parts of Syria. And then we have the basic conflict itself with the Russians supporting the government of Bashar al-Assad. And the U.S. presence, though, is so small. I think it's like 900 soldiers. It doesn't seem to me that the U.S. is living up to its responsibilities to help bring about a resolution to Syria. And I'm not sure if, you want to address that or not, but it seems like we could be and should be doing a lot more. Should we?
Yeah, indeed. Actually, if you look at Syria, this is a country that is ruled by Bashar Assad, president over a broken state, whose few friends demanded a humiliating price for their protection, and they weren't afraid to show it. So yeah, in part, the Russian is controlling the military and aviation and the sky of Syria. On the other, you find the Iranian on the ground. You find the militia sects from Iraq and from Lebanon, from Afghanistan in Syria. And on the north and northwest, you find Turkey is controlling the area and imposing its regulation, including its currency. On the eastern part of Syria, you find the US. I don't think that, the availability of big number of troops would mean that, the US is more engaged. However, what we are worried about is, the attempts to recycle the regime again, and this has been done by the administration of Biden, because Russia wouldn't be able to go and to shop around in the name of Assad unless they have taken the green light by Biden's authority and administration.
So what you're saying, I just want to make sure, because that's such an important point. Basically, we have stepped back and allowed Russia and the Assad regime to reassert themselves in what areas they can control. Exactly. And we're not challenging them at all, are we? We've given it a pass.
Yes, indeed. And you see, for example, when the move of the Interpol to allow Syria access the informational network arouses disquiet among some activists. This is a very recent move. This wouldn't have been happening unless they have taken the green light that things are going to be normal, and they are going to change the behavior of the regime rather than to change the regime or even try to impose the application of the UN resolution 2254. Yeah, absolutely true. I believe that the US is withdrawing back, allowing the Russian to control this strategic area and to give them the light. Although in statements they say no, sanctions is not going to change. However, we know that there is leaking information that Caesar law is going to be amended to allow more rooms for the neighboring countries to have a kind of economic dealing and trades with the Syrian regime, and this can lead to what King Abdullah, the Jordanian, is doing currently. So many things are taking place. However, the Syrian suffering and agony is still the same. The Syrian issue is still the same. The Syrians went out in a revolution against a regime that has led to the displacement and the refugee of no less than 13 million population. The situation is still as it is. You still have more supporters of the regime would like to leave the country immediately. People are starving to death inside Syria. They are facing appalling conditions just because of the regime and not because of the sanctions, because of the corruption, because of the intelligence, because of the violence used against them, because of the militias that are controlling the country and using its resources. And the Syrian is gaining nothing. In front of such suffering, you raise a question, which is politics is without any moral, without morality, but politicians should have some morality. I wonder why the Union is not stepping ahead is not taking any move towards imposing the UN resolution 2254. Why we are left alone? Why the US led the opponents to a shore where they were really achieving victory, and then they seized everything in the name of Islamists, you see? And they gave the green light to the Russians to interfere in Syria directly and to use all type of weapons to eradicate and get rid of the Muslim fanatics. But what happened? Russia killed all the seculars, opponents, and the moderate Islamists, especially in Damascus, in Aleppo, and every part in Syria, and they left the fanatic Islamists in post-Idlib and in the eastern part of Syria. So basically, Russia is working for its own benefit. Iran is working for its own benefit. Nobody is working for the Syrian benefit or the stability of the Middle East. US shouldn't withdraw back, leaving this area just on the hand of a terrorist who terrorized its people, who is ruling a ruined and broken country on all levels.
It's almost as if the United States has just completely, technically withdrawn from Syria almost entirely. Because as you point out, they've given the Russians pretty much the go-ahead to do whatever they want to do in Syria. And as you point out, they've targeted civilians who may, in their mind, not be supporting what they're doing. So they've gone and they're massacring and persecuting all these Syrians in Syria that they don't feel are part of their group. They want to get rid of them. And obviously, it's not even, what's really amazing to me is no one is talking about the Russian presence. All they talk about is the minor scuffle in the north with Turkey and the Kurds. It's almost like a distraction. The only thing we've seen come out of the White House is this: we need to curb what the Turks are doing against the Kurds. That sounds so hypocritical when they don't say anything about what the Russians and Iran are doing to the Syrian people. Yeah, I think you said how many millions of refugees and asylum seekers, homeless people now in Syria? How big is that population?
Actually, we are speaking about two segments: displaced people who were uprooted from their original areas inside Syria and were forced by the regime to ride what is known as green buses and to remove them to Idlib. In Idlib, we have 4.8 million population in Idlib and its suburbs. We have displaced people in the eastern part of Syria with the average of 1.5 million. And we have refugees outside Syria, in Turkey alone, 3.8 million. We have in Jordan, officially by the UNHCR, 600,000, 64,000, but officially we have 1.2 million. In Lebanon, we have 1.4 million. In Europe and the other part of the world, definitely we have more than 2 million population, Syrian refugees, and still, the list is going on. So these are documented numbers by the UNHCR and by all UN agencies. So we are speaking basically on about 13 million out of 22 or 23 million Syrian populations. Needless to speak about almost 1 million detainees. Nobody is moving or talking about their, unforeseen, appalling living conditions, or those who were just disappeared because they were brutally killed by the regimes in the detainee centers or in the prisons. And you have seen the photos, the footages of what is called Caesar, about thousands of Syrian detainees who were brutally killed in prisons. Needless to speak about 1 million people who lost their lives during this devastating war. So what are we doing? Turkey is in Syria just because they have real threat from the Kurds, and the Kurds controlled the borders areas, and they dismissed the original Arabs from there, and those people went as refugees in camps on the Turkish borders. So Turkey has its own security concerns, although it is not justified. Now they have dealing with Iran and with Russia, regardless of the opinion of the Syrians or their wishes in having a democratic country. So everybody is telling us.
Yeah, isn't it kind of true, though, that the U.S. inaction has kind of pushed the Turks to reach out to the Russians and the Iranians? Because in reality, the U.S. has no influence at all in Syria. So the Turks, the Kurds, I think, really are engaged in a process to expel Arabs and Syrians out of their area to create their own little country, which, you know, I mean, I'm not against the Kurds, but at the same time, I'm against the idea that they can take something from a people that are in such trauma to exploit that for their own benefit is terrible. It seems like the Turks are trying to stop that, which could be a good thing. But instead of working with the United States, as they were years ago, they're now working with the Iranians and the Russians to make that happen. It's really a mixed up situation.
Indeed, everybody is looking for its own benefit, and we have to separate between the Kurds as people and Kurds as, militias who belong, and mostly they are coming from Iraq. They are after Öcalan. They raise his photos. They raise another Syrian flag, because always we say, if those people suffered from oppression on the time of the regime, they shouldn't practice the same thing on the Syrian people. We believe that, they are Syrians. They should have their own nationality, and nationality guarantee for everyone his own rights to be from the top of the pyramid's president to the end of the pyramid according to his or her qualification, and not based on your ethnicity. Otherwise, look at the USA. How many ethnicities do they have? But they have one president. They have one country. You see, so basically, of course, we denounce the brutal actions that even, they kill even other Kurds because they object their policy. So they have their own agenda. Turkey has its own agenda. Russia has its own agenda. US has its own agenda. Iran has its own agenda, and they all benefit from the presence of Bashar Assad in power, because he is selling everything in the country, in the land, in the sea, on the sky, for others, just to stay in power. And the one who is paying the dear price is the Syrian. The one who is paying the dear financial price is the European Union and the rest of the world. And when you speak about security concern worldwide, you speak about, the terrorism that is being exported outside of Syria. When young lads have no education, no job, no security of life, what they do, Russians are recruiting them to go and fight in another part of the world. Turkey is recruiting them to go and to fight. So they become mercenaries. And those mercenaries can do anything just for the sake of money. If you want to stop all this, US should have a different policy, should be more positive and more serious in dealing with the Syrian fight, because, the presence of troops is not an indicator is that, they care or they don't care. No, we know that behind the scene, the US diplomacy is playing that role of stepping back, sending signs, green lights to others to start a normal relationships with Assad regime, the thing we absolutely reject.
And, the real tragedy here from the standpoint of the United States is that we are doing nothing to help the poor, the victims, We're doing nothing to end the crisis in Syria. What we're basically doing is just allowing it to continue status quo, which is horrible. It's the worst status quo of any area in the world, I think, in my opinion. And the only reason we're doing that, I think, is because the U.S. is allied with Israel. Israel is happy to see this conflict in its northern border, its northeast border, because it prevents what they see as a threat coming from Syria. All this turmoil in Syria is to their benefit. And as long as that conflict doesn't impose on Israel, the U.S. is going to do nothing. We're going to do nothing. If for some reason this conflict were to be a threat to Israel, I would bet that you would see an automatic rise in the Biden administration attention to Syria, and they would take quick and firm action to change things. And that aside, though, what do you think the U.S. should be doing that they could be doing to bring the tensions down, to ease the suffering of Syrian refugees, asylum seekers? What should we be doing? Here's an opportunity for Biden to lead. What should he do to be a leader to bring some relief to that area of the world?
Yeah, let me just start from a very important point I didn't want, to talk about, but you raised. The whole issue is about the security of Israel. And since Syria has been destroyed totally, and it is military infrastructure, the human fabric, the human capital. So why to change the regime? And who would they find somebody to protect their borders more than this? If you want to have peace and stability in the area, you should, leave the occupied lands, and then you can start fresh. I believe that the U.S. should play a more decisive role. First of all, what happens, with the activation of the partnership of the Syrian regime with the Interpol would bring a bill that worries all the political opponents who are working outside Syria, that they can be in danger and they can be arrested and brought to the regime by faking, fake allegations against them. This step should be studied carefully, and such things shouldn't happen. Number two, we believe that the U.S. is still the biggest power in the world, and they should stand for what they are and who they are. U.S. shouldn't sell a whole nation for the sake of I don't know how do you call it, mercenary politics. They should take more serious actions towards finding a final solution to the Syrian revolution and the crisis by implementing and force implement the decision 2254. If it is going to face an obstacle of the veto in the UN, they can forward the file into the UN General Assembly, and in that you can escape this and you can be more serious in finding solutions. Coalition opposition party maybe is not the good representative of Syrians, but we are having other national bodies that brings the Syrian voice into one column, into one target. They can take such initiatives and the platform more seriously to engage them in what is called the opponent body that can really help in reaching a satisfactory solution for everybody.
Are the Syrian refugees and asylum seekers getting the amount of support that they need to survive, or is it just minimal? And is the United States in participating in helping?
Maybe the United States is the last country to accept refugees. And also the movement of the refugees or legal, applications for refugees is in its lowest. Countries such as France used to accept the refugees Syrian refugees, the moment they arrive. Now you find that, they reject a lot of files, not for good reasons, just because they are tired of refugees and because you have other crises that has been created by the US, such as what happened in Afghanistan. So you have more floods of new refugees and always, when your file is archived, people would like to consider other things. 10 years, tell me about any nation who fought for 10 years, who paid millions of killed people, the destroyed country, and they are still striving to return back to square one. So this is why countries stopped more or less having or receiving more refugees. The opposite, as we heard that Denmark and other countries were thinking of returning the refugees because they believe that Syria is safe now. Whereas you find in Syria, people are queuing to get their passport to flee the country, be it by sea, by air, by foot, just to leave Syria.
So this this false sense of things are better really comes from us stepping back as a United States. We've allowed it to seem like everything is okay, but everything is not okay. They shouldn't be telling people to go back to Syria. We should be accepting more refugees here in the United States, temporary, to help them, to give them shelter and take a more political stand. I don't know what it's going to take to get Biden to do the right thing. He withdrew from Afghanistan without even realizing what he was doing. It's a mess there because of him. He's turned his back on Syria, I believe, not wanting to confront the Russians. And to me, that's a victory for the Russians. It's something that the Russians want, that we've backed down. I'm not sure the American people understand all this. And in a way, I blame the news media, which has really not paid attention to what's happening in Syria. It's just a blur of a conflict that's hard to explain. And I think the media should be doing a better job of explaining to the American people that this is a serious threat. That turmoil in Syria actually creates an environment where terrorism can come and attack U.S. interests. But we just don't seem to care about it. It's very tragic. I'm embarrassed by what our country is doing and not doing. It's shameful.
Well, Ray, you just said it. Why do we need the U.S. to welcome more refugees? Why we don't sort the problems of these refugees in their own countries and then ask all the countries of the world to return the Syrian back? Why should we displace and make refugees of tens of millions of people worldwide to keep 100 people, the Assad regime and its narrow link in power? Why? Did he manage to keep the sovereignty of Syria? If so, what are the Russians doing in Syria? What are the Iranians doing?
So
you should solve the problem. The media, the American media, should keep bringing the Syrian issues every time, just to tell the Americans that the threat can be by keeping the status quo in Syria, because it will be a factory, not only the drug, but also of terrorism.
Dr. Ghazzoul, listen, this deserves so much more time to talk about because it's such a complicated issue, but I think you've given us some insight into what needs to be done over there. My guest, Dr. Nahed Ghazzoul, thank you so much for joining us this morning here at the U.S. Arab Radio Network. We have to do this again because I agree that this topic needs a brighter spotlight, needs more discussion. People need to be focused on it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.